The Kurakhove pocket is closed. The Ukrainian army is tired of losing cities and ready to move on Kyiv. Good afternoon, dear friends. We continue to analyze the situation on the front lines in our daily format. Before we begin, I sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription supports its growth. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. As for the situation beyond the front lines, last night there was a massive drone attack on the city of Engels, which caused fires and prompted the creation of an operational headquarters to address the aftermath. Explosions were also heard this morning in the Kyiv, Poltava, and other regions, indicating drone strikes. On the front lines, the situation is very dynamic. The armed forces of Ukraine, AFU, appear to be retreating along almost the entire front, due to a potential lack of reserves or other circumstances. Let's delve into the details. Opening the map, we see that the focus on events in the Kursk region has overshadowed developments on other parts of the front. Today, we'll correct that by discussing what's happening in Ukraine. As mentioned, the AFU are retreating on all sectors without exaggeration. Southern sector will start in the south and move north. Let's examine the area around Velika Novosilka. Following the Russian forces' capture of the city of Kurakhove, the front lines here have also become active. Yesterday, reports surfaced that Russian troops began advancing from Novi Komar northward toward the village of Otradne. Simultaneously, there's continued pressure on Ukrainian positions in Neskuchny and Vremivka, as well as movement from Rivnopil toward Novosilka. To clarify, Velika Novosilka is an urban-type settlement, while Novosilka is a much smaller village. Russian forces are advancing toward Novosilka from these positions. Kurakhove area moving on to Kurakhove, the situation is even more dynamic. Russian forces are advancing toward Dakhna, where the Ukrainian garrison that retreated from Kurakhove is now concentrated. Combat in Dakhna is expected soon, as reported not only by Russian but also Ukrainian sources. For instance, Ukrainian journalist Yuri Butusov has called for a withdrawal, not only from Dakhna but from the entire line along the Vovcha River. This suggestion is rational for the AFU, as Russian forces are simultaneously advancing toward Ulakli and Constantinople from the south. From the north, the situation is worse for the AFU. The Russian army has captured Petropavlivka, Slavyanka, and Shevchenko. A broad front is forming to attack the large village of Andriivka, putting Ukrainian positions in Ulakli and Constantinople under fire from both directions. Strategically, it would make sense for the AFU to withdraw westward and build a new defensive line there. However, President Zelensky is unlikely to approve such a retreat, as it would be seen as a failure, a betrayal. Thus, the AFU will likely continue to fight under unfavorable conditions, incurring significant losses, while the Russian army increases its pressure. The capture of Kurakhove frees up significant Russian forces, which will likely be deployed for a westward offensive. Pokrovsk direction. In the Pokrovsk sector, the Ukrainian army faces a complete collapse, and in some areas the situation is even worse. For instance, Russian troops reportedly entered the village of Yasenev yesterday and continue advancing toward Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Interestingly, reports emerged yesterday of Russian aviation using air-dropped bombs in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast for the first time, made possible by the front line's proximity to the region's borders. Near Pokrovsk itself, Russian forces are encircling the city from the west and east, with successes on both flanks. On the western flank, troops from Novovasilivka have reached the outskirts of Uspenivka and are preparing to storm the village. There's also movement from Solon and Volkovo. From Solon, forces are advancing along the Solon River toward the village of Udakhne, while from Volkovo they are moving in two directions. First, they've reached the outskirts of Zverovo, which is almost merged with Pokrovsk, forming a continuous urban area. Zverovo connects to Pervomaisk, which in turn connects to Pokrovsk, effectively creating a unified suburban area. The situation is clearly unfavorable for the AFU across multiple sectors, with significant pressure from advancing Russian forces. Second direction. Kotlina. The second direction involves Kotlina. Russian forces had already reached the road connecting Kotlina and Pokrovsk, but during a counterattack, Ukrainian troops managed to push the Russian positions back slightly. As for the eastern flank, the Russian army achieved two major successes here. 1. A rapid advance near the settlement of Vozdvizhenka and entry into Yelizavetivka. Second, progress toward Baranivka from two directions. Russian positions are currently on the outskirts of the village. Additionally, there's an effort to advance from Vozdvizhenka toward Vodyain too, with the ultimate aim of reaching the Kramatorsk-Pokrovsk highway. Although reconnaissance groups, DRG, have already reached the highway, Russian forces remain about 2 kilometers south of the road. If they continue forward, they'll approach Toretsk. Toretsk, a dire situation for the AFU. In Toretsk, the situation for the Ukrainian Armed Forces, AFU, is extremely grim. Around 90% of the city is now under full and undisputed control of Russian forces, who are advancing rapidly. This difference in pace is due to the transition from fighting in high-rise urban areas to private sector housing. After being driven out of the multi-story residential districts, it became nearly impossible for the AFU to hold positions, leading to daily losses of streets and neighborhoods. As of now, the AFU controls only the Toretsk mine, its slag heap, and a few surrounding blocks. These positions are held due to their elevation, which provides fortified vantage points for shelling. However, the rest of the city is already lost to the Ukrainian forces. A few days ago, Russian troops advanced to both the northern and western outskirts of Toretsk. Yesterday, a video from Toretsk surfaced online, showing the intense fighting that took place for control of the city. Toretsk has suffered extensive damage, and its restoration will clearly require enormous effort and resources. Siversk direction, progress toward Verkhnokamianska and near Terny. On the Siversk axis, Russian forces made minor advances toward Verkhnokamianske and the vicinity of Terny. They have firmly established control over Ivanivka and are working to secure nearby heights, reportedly with success. This positions Russian forces for a potential future offensive on the city of Lyman. Kupiansk direction, January 8th. Update: in the Kupiansk sector, the Russian army continues to expand its bridgehead near Dvorichna. These updates have become regular. Perhaps not daily, but at least a couple of times a week. There are reports of Russian forces capturing new positions west of the Oskil River in the Dvorichna area. Recently, Russian forces took control of a hill south of the settlement of Zakidna. Today, reports indicate that Russian troops are gradually occupying the entire territory of Dvorichna, south of the Nizhna Dvorichna River. Additionally, according to my information, Ukrainian soldiers are no longer present on the hill northeast of Zakidny, although Russian forces have not yet firmly established themselves there. Nevertheless, I'm marking this area as under Russian control. The Ukrainian side is deploying increasing numbers of reserves to this area. So far, they've only managed to hold off Russian attacks, but haven't been able to mount an effective counterattack. I'll reiterate what I've said before. Without firm Russian control over Zakidna, the bridgehead cannot yet be considered stable or dangerous for the AFU. Borova direction, January 8th. Update: on the Borova front, the Ukrainian side is using active defense tactics to delay the inevitable fighting for Borova itself. Ukrainian forces are attempting counterattacks from the Bohuslavka area toward Zarizov. These efforts have been largely unsuccessful. However, they've managed to maintain the front line in this area for now. This is not the case southeast of Borova, where Russian forces are attacking and gradually descending from the hills toward the town. This advance appears inevitable and not far off. Lyman direction, morning update, January 8th. By midday on January 8th, Russian forces had attempted to expand their breakthrough in the Ivanivka area, aiming to push toward the settlement of Kolodyazy. Unfortunately for the Russian army, these attempts were unsuccessful. However, they retained control of the hill west of Ivanivka. Given the strategic importance of this direction for the security of the Ukrainian Siversk grouping, the AFU is deploying additional reserves here, not only to contain the breakthrough, but also to try and push Russian forces off the hills west of Ivanivka. Serious clashes expected in the area. Siversk direction, January 8th. The front awakens here too. After the planned rotation of the Russian command at all levels, including the commander of the grouping, the situation for the Russian army in this area is gradually improving. This is despite the fact that the Ukrainian armed forces, AFU, units opposing Russian fighters, remain the same, and they are very strong. Nevertheless, in the Bilohorivka sector, the Russian army is slowly gaining ground from the AFU, taking a hill south of Verkhnokamianske. Moreover, recent battles near Bilohorivka itself have not been one-sided in favor of Ukraine as they were before, though still difficult. Yesterday, on what is essentially the Kramatorsk section of the front, Russian forces succeeded in attacking south of Orikhovo-Vasilivka. Russian fighters captured AFU positions on a hill both south and north of the settlement, further improving their tactical situation in the area. Gradually, these gains could lead to major battles in this section of the front in the near future, especially considering developments on the Lyman direction. Chasiv Yar direction, January 8th, AFU units in the city center, trapped in an operational encirclement. The term units is an exaggeration here. It's only a few companies. Nevertheless, the situation for the Ukrainian forces has become critical after Russian troops advanced to the area south of the train station. The Russian side not only recaptured parts of the refractory plant for the second time, but also took control of part of the high-rise residential area to the west, creating even more problems for the AFU. As expected, after the successful completion of the Russian breakthrough in the northern part of the city and the establishment of fire control over Ukrainian logistics, the AFU's defenses in the city center have begun to crumble rapidly. This also allowed the Russian army to resume offensive operations south of the city. It is likely that more positive updates from this area will emerge soon. Summary: no significant changes have occurred in other sections of the front. That concludes today's update on the situation at the front lines. I wish you all a pleasant final day of the weekend. Take care of yourselves and don't forget to stay informed.